This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a founding member of one of America's most popular and beloved vocal groups, commonly referred to as America's first boy band, the Four Preps. As young teenage students at Hollywood High in 1954, our guest, along with singing partners Glen Larson, Ed Cobb, and Marv Ingram, entered a high school talent show, and they kept on performing at high schools until that fateful day in 1956, when they were signed to a recording contract at Capitol Records, making them the youngest vocal group in history to ever sign with a major record label. They recorded dozens of classic songs and produced 8 gold singles and 3 gold albums featuring their signature tunes, Dreamy Eyes,
Dreamy eyes, who are you dreaming of? Dreamy eyes, who do you really love?
26 Miles, Santa Catalina,
26 miles across the sea, Santa Catalina is awaiting for me. Santa Catalina, the island of romance, 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 romance. Water all around it, everywhere. Tropical trees and salty air. But for me, the thing that's awaiting there, romance.
Big Man,
I was a big man yesterday, but oh, you ought to see me now. Oh, well, I talked big yesterday, but oh, you ought to see me now. I bragged too long, my road was strong, there'll never be another guy. But you said more when you whispered your goodbye. Well,
Lazy Summer Night,
It's such a lazy summer night. There's not a moving thing in sight. It's all so quiet. No riot. Why, even in the thicket, Mr. Cricket slowing down.
Down by the Station,
Down by the station early in the morning, met a little girl about as cute as she could be. I turned on my charms and told her that I loved her, said that she would always be the number one for me. She'd always be my number one girl. Said there'd be no number 2 or 3.
More Money for You and Me,
First we have the Fleetwoods, a very successful group. Let's send them to Alaska to entertain our troops. When they start in a singing and putting on their show, the temperature around them will be 45 below. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
I'm Mr. Blue. When I say I'm freezing, me too. Just turn around, head for the warmth of town. I'm freezing through and through. Call me Mr. Blue.
and many more. In 1957, Cashbox Magazine named the Four Preps the most promising newcomer of the year. They made numerous appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show, American Bandstand, and many other TV variety shows, in addition to singing backup for Ricky Nelson for 4 years on The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. And of course, they appeared with Sandra Dee in the 1959 movie Gidget, and they sang the theme song from the 1957 Clark Gable movie Band of Angels. The Four Preps headlined at nightclubs, concert halls, and college campuses across the country and toured with everyone from Tennessee Ernie Ford, George Burns and Carol Channing, to Henry Mancini, Johnny Mathis, Buddy Rich, and Glenn Campbell. They received an official commendation from the Air Force for their extraordinary contribution to National Guard recruitment. And in 2007, they were inducted into the Vocal Group Hall of Fame. And now, our guest has released a fascinating and highly entertaining memoir entitled Icons, Idols, and Idiots of Hollywood: My Adventures in America's First Boy Band. This delightful book details our guest's remarkable show business journey, full of great anecdotes, many colorful adventures, and poignant memories of pop culture history. And let me tell you, the chapter about his hilarious experience filming a TV commercial with Annette Funicello at Disneyland is easily worth 10 times the price of the book. I'm delighted to welcome the legendary Bruce Belland to our show. Bruce, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's great. I've been looking forward to this, and I love guys like you that do their homework. Thank you. You told me some things I'd forgotten. It was a nice recap.
Now, you decided you wanted to be a singer at the age of 4 after singing God Bless America in church. Can you still remember that moment?
Absolutely. Well, not only do I kind of remember it just from it happening, but my parents would tell me that story the whole time I was growing up. That was always trotted out when they wanted me to get a good laugh about my little adventure as my first solo. So yeah, it was a very poignant moment for me. I remember it very well. I particularly remember my father, who was not terribly demonstrative, rushing over after the solo and hugging me and growling in my ear, "You are terrific." Well, that was it. I wanted to be a singer from then on. My father loved it. The congregation loved it. I loved it, and here we go.
Well, your father was a fundamentalist minister who wanted you to be a gospel singer, not a pop singer. Now, when you signed your first contract at Capitol Records, you were so young that you needed your parents' signatures on the contract. Was it difficult persuading your dad to sign?
Yes, already making me anxious again just to talk about it. All the other parents and the other 3 guys had signed almost immediately. I mean, a Capitol Records contract. Why would you say no? Well, my father would say no because he wanted me to sing for the Lord. And we sweated it out for about 2 weeks while he was agonizing over whether or not to sign it. And it started to jeopardize the contract itself. Capitol was saying, let's do it or not. And so my mom took him aside. My 5'2" mom took him aside, never stood taller than when she looked him in the eye and said, "You can't deny him this. You taught him to believe in himself and his talent. And now that he's got a chance to make it come true, you just can't turn it down." And he finally relented and signed it. And there we were.
Well, your dad used to say that he did his job for the outcome, not the income. Did you have
nice thing. Yeah.
Did you have that same attitude about being in show business?
I did. I've heard more than one performer say, "I pay them if I do it, even if they didn't pay me." Even today, Harvey, looking forward to this interview. I love people. I'm a people lover, and I love getting up there and feeling the rush that happens when the crowd likes what you do. So I got a feeling I probably would have done it just for scale if I could.
Now, who were the singers you loved listening to as a kid?
Mills Brothers, the Mills Brothers. My mom played "Till Then, My Darling, Please Wait for Me" during the war when my father, like all fathers, were gone. So I grew up hearing the Mills Brothers, and then when I was 14 or 15, I snuck into a nightclub on the Sunset Strip, not far from our home in Hollywood, and met the Mills Brothers. They were performing there that night, and met Harry Mills, the lead singer. And Harvey, that was a dream come true for me. If I never met another star, I was in heaven. I idolized them and their easy, natural, buoyant kind of harmony and personality on stage. So I would have to say them. And then later, the 4 Freshmen were big influence on me. And as I'm told, the 4 Preps influenced Brian Wilson. So it went generation to generation, you might say.
Yeah, it really did. It's fascinating that the Mills Brothers appealed to you, because I would assume that when that doorman at Ciro's let you in to watch the Mills Brothers when you were 15, that must have been the moment that you decided you wanted to sing harmony in a vocal group rather than be a solo performer.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I like the sound of my voice. I guess most singers do, but I like it much better when it's wrapped around 3 other voices. And there's something not only about the sound that harmony thrills me with, but the camaraderie, leaning in and making the chord ring. And when the audience isn't quite with you right now, you get in and dig a little deeper, and all four of you pull together like a good team. And the next thing you know, they're on their feet. So, yeah, that's to me always been the biggest thrill as a performer. Even one other voice harmonizing with me is more fun than singing by myself. I sing a lot of solos, but harmony to me is where it's at.
Now, your first single was Dreamy Eyes, released on October 29th, 1956. Bruce, can you recall how it felt when you heard the Four Preps on the radio for the very first time?
I was driving down Sunset Boulevard in my beat up old 41 Mercury convertible ragtop, and the top was down because the top was torn. We hadn't made it yet, so we were just skimping by. I was at the corner of Sunset and La Cienega when on the radio came Dreamy Eyes, our first release. I went nuts. I jammed on the gas as fast as I could, tore over to my girlfriend's house, drove up on her front lawn, which did not thrill her parents, and screamed, "We're on the radio! We're on the radio!" And my girlfriend came running out, "Oh, and that was the first time. I don't think I've ever met a recording artist, Harvey, who didn't remember the first time they heard their record on the radio. It's a thrill. And to a kid who grew up hearing Bing Crosby and the Mills Brothers on that radio, to now hear Bruce Belland coming out of that speaker was a thrill I won't ever forget.
You know, when you look at the other vocal groups of the 50s and 60s, like the Four Aces, the Four Freshmen, the Coasters, the Drifters, the Four Lads, was there something distinctive, in your opinion, that set the Four Preps apart from those other groups?
Harry, I think it would be from the very early on high school days, we were absolutely bound and determined to be comedians and entertainers as much as we were singers. We wanted to combine the two elements of comedy and music. So I think what may have distinguished us from other groups of our type was the fact we did a lot of comedy. In fact, one of our biggest hits, More Money for You and Me, was comedy impressions of all the other groups. And that was a specialty of ours. And so I would think that would be what distinguished us from other groups most notably was the crazy. I mean, for one thing, Ed Cobb, our bass, who I had known since I was 9 years old, was 6'5" on stage. I'm 5'6". So right away you've got comedy, and we love to cut up and then turn around and bring them to tears with a good ballad. So that was very much a forte of ours.
Now, as you know, your song 26 Miles is widely credited with creating what has become known as the California sound that heavily influenced the Beach Boys, the Eagles, and others. When you were recording the song, did you realize at that time that you were actually creating a new sound and a new flavor of music?
We really didn't, because that hadn't been our intent going in. We just wanted to do four-part harmony. And by the way, our first release, Dreamy Eyes, was a very different kind of a sound than what we ultimately established as the Four Prep sound, because it was me out in front singing a solo with the other guys groaning harmony behind me, much like the Platters, for example. But we wanted a four-part harmony. What happened, it sounds crazy now with all our high-tech gimmicks that we have in recording, but in those days, it was rather low-tech, and when we recorded the first track and played it back, we liked it, but something was missing, so we went ahead and added in the second chorus a soprano obbligato. And when we got to the final mix with that soprano obbligato having been added, it was so loud that it drowned out some of our lyrics. And our producer loved the lyrics about a leaky old boat and 40 kilometers. He said, "I don't know what to do. How are we going to fix this?" Talk about low tech. Finally, he said, "I know this sounds crazy. Could you guys go in and sing over your original track?" "Okay, what parts will we sing?" No. Sing the same exact parts as you did the first time, and it will beef up the sound. Well, what happened, of course, instead of 4 voices, we then had 8 voices, and it was a much fuller, richer, thicker sound, which became known as the California sound. But it was very much an accident when it happened.
26 Miles was released December 2nd, 1957. Whose idea was it to release a song about a tropical island at Christmas time?
Well, part of my book, Icons, Idols, and Idiots of Hollywood, has the word idiots in it. So evidently some idiot at the tower thought that would be a good time to put out a song about a tropical island in the middle of December. Interestingly enough, I was really very upset when I heard when it was going to be released. I thought, well, that's it, forget it. It was the B side of the record that we put out at that time. But in subsequent years, I've had fans come up to me and say, When I was driving home in January with snow drifts on both sides of the road and the windshield wiper could barely keep up with the snowfall, on would come this beautiful, lilting, buoyant sound of the four preps singing about a tropical island with palm trees and beautiful girls and romance. Thank you. Thank you for warming me up during a cold January night. So I guess it turned out for the better, quite obviously.
You know, Bruce, a lot of people may not realize that 26 Miles was actually on the B side of your song, It's You, which did not become a hit. What made the DJs at the radio station start playing 26 Miles?
Well, that's an interesting story. It was a disc jockey in Hartford, Connecticut, which, as you can imagine, in January is a pretty cold place. And he played the A side, It's You from the Music Man, a very mediocre ballad. And after he played it, he wanted to go to the men's room up the hall, take a break. So he simply turned the record over and, heck, I'll play the B side and go to the men's room. When he came back up the hall from the men's room, the switchboard was lighting up like a Christmas tree. Everyone was calling and saying, "What is that song you play? Who are those guys?" Well, bless his heart, and I've always wished I knew who he was. I'd send him a check. He picked up the phone, Harvey, on Monday and called the Capitol Tower. You know, the fact that he even took his call and put him through. He said, "This is Joe Blow from Hartford, Connecticut. I've got to talk to your promotion department." They got on the phone. He said, "You're on the wrong side. I played 26 Miles, the B side. Switchboard lit up like a Christmas tree. You guys are screwing it up here." Thank God, for once in their life, the Capitol brass listened and said to their field representatives, "Okay, turn the record over. It's 26 Miles." And there we were. The rocket was launched.
And the rest was history.
Yeah, I guess so. The first year the record came out, Catalina had 1 million visitors for the first time in history. So the record kind of spread the gospel about that little island as well.
It sure did. Now, as you know, Bruce, our show is televised in the UK, so I have to mention your song Big Man, which went to #1 in the UK. Tell me how you came up with that great piano introduction to that song.
Well, when we were in high school and attended parties, and dancing and jitterbug and dance music was really the big rage, inevitably, sometime during the evening, if there was a piano in a little party room at someone's house, someone would sit down and begin to well, the other one dum 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 da 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 dum da dum bum 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 heart and soul. So that rumbling, we called it party piano, was very much embedded in our consciousness. So when we got to making that record, we sat down with Lincoln Mayorga, who was our 5th prep and our arranger and genius conductor. We told him we want a party sound, rumbling, rumbling, rumbling. So at the session, we went through 20, 25 takes trying to get a big, massive rumbling sound. Couldn't figure out how to make it ring enough. And suddenly somebody got the idea to take a sandbag and lay it over the sustain loud pedal on the piano, so the sound would tumble over itself in a big echoey sound. And that sandbag across that pedal on the piano is what resulted in that sound, which one disc jockey called the biggest piano in the world. So we finally got that out. We got it on take 30, as a matter of fact. It took us that long to get it.
Well, it's a real classic. Now, you mentioned, Bruce, already that what made the Four Preps distinctive was the comedy. You were not just singers, you were entertainers. Whose idea was it to do the comedy?
Well, as you know from the book, when I was 14 or 15, after my parents would go to sleep on Saturday night, because preachers go to bed early, tomorrow was showtime, I would sneak out the back door of our house and go up to the Sunset Strip, which is about 3 blocks from our little parsonage. And I would sneak in backstage and watch all the various acts. I was a little blonde-haired kid with a gift of gab, and I befriended myself to the stage managers, and I became kind of their mascot. So one night I went in and watched the Will Maston Trio. Well, Will Maston was the uncle of a little fellow named Sammy Davis Jr. So the Will Maston Trio consisted of Sammy's uncle, Will Maston, Sammy's father, Sammy Davis Sr., and Sammy. I watched them absolutely enthralled backstage, because in the middle of the act, Sammy stepped forward, imitated Tony Barnum and Tony Bennett and all the great singers, and did comedy and funny impressions and shtick. And then they turn right around and do an incredible dance number. So I thought, that's it. I want to be like Sammy. I want to be versatile and make them laugh and entertain them that way, and then turn around and break their hearts with the ballad. So he was really my first inspiration to pattern my conduct on stage that way.
Yeah, that was really brilliant. It really did set you apart. Is it true that your live album, The Four Preps on Campus, which was a huge success, was that the inspiration for the hit musical Forever Plaid?
I've been told that. The fellow who wrote Forever Plaid, who created it, was a man named Stuart Ross. And one night after that show was a huge hit, we happened to end up having dinner together with some mutual friends. And he said, when I was in high school, my brother, who was in college, came home for summer vacation from college with your album, The Four Preps on Campus, and played it over and over all summer. I had it memorized. And it gave me the idea, wouldn't it be fun to do a musical about four guys like these fellows that made this album and see if we can go somewhere with that. And lo and behold, Forever Plaid was born, and I visited performances of that show in many cities around the world, and it's quite a lovely thing to think that we had anything to do with creating that lovely, great fun show.
Well, it's just one more piece of pop culture that your group influenced. Now, in 1959, all four of you got drafted, and in 1962, you got drafted again. Your experiences in the military formed the basis of a movie you wrote called Weekend Warriors, starring Lloyd Bridges. How realistic was that movie?
As a matter of fact, we were actually in a squadron called the 146th. But in the movie, so to avoid any libel suits, I cut it in half and made it the Fighting 73rd. Ergo, I would say half of the movie is true. But it was quite an adventure. We had prayed and hoped and strived to get a Las Vegas booking, and lo and behold, we got a booking with Carol Channing and George Burns in Vegas. And about 2 weeks before it was to happen, we got reactivated for the Berlin crisis by JFK. And suddenly we were serving active duty on a military base from 6 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. We got down on our knees and begged our commanding officer to let it. We had our own plane by that time, and to let us park our plane at the military base. And at 4 o'clock, we got in the plane and flew to Vegas, took off our grungy fatigues. By the way, my job, actually, seriously, truthfully, was cleaning latrines on the airplanes when they landed. And we go to Vegas, take off our grungy fatigues, put on a $500 mohair tuxedo, go out on stage and be stars for 2 shows with chorus girls and glamorous and fans. Then we get back on our plane at 5 in the morning to make 6 o'clock roll call, fly back to Vegas, put on the grungy fatigues. I go back to cleaning latrines. And so I kept saying to myself, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. Someday I've got to figure out how to turn this into a movie, because no one would believe this adventure. Many years later, a script I had written around that time, I dug it out and started to shop it and ended up getting a contract to have the movie made. And we landed Lloyd Bridges, who read the script and loved it and said, I'd love to do this movie. And so that latrine cleaning duty turned into a hit movie. So I guess there's a bright side to everything.
Well, you know, as you're talking and as I was reading your book, I was wondering, would you like to see a movie made about the Four Preps based on your book?
You know, I'll be honest with you. I've never said this to anybody else, but I keep fantasizing that Icons, Idols, and Idiots of Hollywood will become a Netflix series. I always think big. My wife kids me about this. Oh, you, but yeah, I would love to. I would love to think so. I've been told by people who read it that, you know, the story of a little 4-year-old kid who sings his first solo in church and ends up in the Vocal Group Hall of Fame is kind of an interesting journey that people might enjoy. So I always think positive, keep my fingers crossed, and we'll see.
I don't think that it's that unrealistic. The book is really very compelling. There were a lot of special moments in your career that would make for a great miniseries. I'm going to mention a few of them now, some of the highlights of your career, and get your comments about them, starting with the time you shared the stage with Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy at the Coconut Grove. What was that like?
Well, we had just signed with Capitol. We did not have a hit yet. We were not known to the public really at all, but we had two hotshot agents, both of whom were quite young and striving like we were at the time, but both went on to be giants in the entertainment industry, very ambitious guys. And lo and behold, they landed us a job as the entree act for Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. Edgar had retired, but he was coming out of retirement in his hometown where he was beloved, and was going to open it to Coconut Grove, the world famous Coconut Grove, Harvey, where a year before this, we had attended there in rented white dinner jackets with our dates after our senior prom. About a year after I attended there as a prom goer, I'm on stage performing at the Coconut Grove. I treasure the marquee out in front that had Edgar Bergen and underneath it the four preps. It was one of the highlights of my career to this day. And he was a wonderful, kind, soft-spoken, elegant man, and it was a wonderful experience. Our opening night in Hollywood, every star in Hollywood was there, from old Esther Williams, Ricardo Montalban. I mean, star after star. We just with our mouths open. We couldn't believe we were really part of that.
It is really a dream come true. And you performed with Ricky Nelson many times on the Ozzie and Harriet TV show, and you also toured with Ricky Nelson in 1957. Is it true that his very first performance in front of a live audience was with you?
It not only was with us, but it was a total and complete shock to Ricky. We were on the show. When we first began to perform and sign with Capitol, we called every high school in Los Angeles and said, we will come and do a show free for you. We do all the current hits. It's a clean show. You can ask the other schools we performed at. We're happy to do it for you free. So we did a lot of high school assemblies. And one afternoon, we were scheduled to sing at a West Side high school named Hamilton High. And we were loading up the car on the movie set, on the Ozzie and Harriet set, to go to the show. And Ricky came walking by, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "We're going to do a show." But he said, "Hey, I'd like to come along and see what you guys do, because one of these days, maybe I'll get on stage. But let me go along and observe and see what you guys put together." So we got out on stage, the four of us, and did a couple of numbers. And then Glen Larson, our spokesman, stepped to the microphone and said, "How would you all like to see our buddy Ricky Nelson come out here and sing a song?" Well, the place went nuts. Ricky heard it off stage. His eyes got wide, and he took off and tore for the exit to make an escape. Well, three of us, while Glenn was introducing him, ran off stage, grabbed him, and literally, picked him up bodily and carried him, squirming and squalling out on stage. Well, he was out there now. Of course, when the girls realized it really was him. This is the regimented 50s, when people pretty much stayed in line. Not today. Every girl in the place got out of her seat and rushed down to the stage, trying to get up on stage to claw at Ricky and at us. We managed to finish the one number we did, and then worked our way through the crowd back to our car out in the driveway outside the auditorium. And when we came out, you couldn't see our car. It was covered with female bodies on the roof trying to get into the back seat. So we managed to push them aside and wedge our way into the car, and then ease out through the mob as they were separating to let us drive out. And now we're heading back to the studio. And usually after a big show like you're high-fiving, you're yelling and having a great, we were stunned. We sat there. What is going on? What's happening to our buddy? This is crazy. It was the first taste we had of the teen idol craziness. And we were silent, kind of thoughtful for a minute. And then I'd look at Ricky. We'd make eye contact. We'd break up and laugh. And then we'd get silent and thoughtful again. But that really, Ricky later in his life cited that as the turning point in his career, when he saw the reaction of the crowd and felt what he felt with their reaction. Because till then, he'd sung in a movie studio with, a dozen stagehands and a few extras. Now it was 1,000 kids rushing the stage. But that was a big influence on him, and it was a memory we have forever. I mean, Ricky was a dear friend, one of my best friends, and we ended up climbing onto the rocket ship together and going on tour with him. And if you think 700 or 800 kids in a high school auditorium are noisy, try our first show at the Ohio State Fair, when 35,000 semi-hysterical teenage girls were in the crowd, and it was an arena. So it was all hard surfaces, no drapery or carpeting to absorb the sound. We came out for the first number. The noise was so loud that we could see each other's lips moving, but we couldn't hear each other or the band. It was absolute insanity. That was just the beginning.
When I hear you talk about that, it's almost unbelievable what you've lived through and the moments that you've had in your career. And there are just so many of them. For example, I'll take you to another moment. October 13th, 1957. You appeared in a TV special starring Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Louis Armstrong, and Rosemary Clooney. You got to spend a week with them rehearsing for that show. Was that one of the biggest highlights of your career?
Oh, yeah. 1957, we had a record contract, but no hits. Again, no hits yet. Again, these two powerful Stryver agents got us booked on the show because Bing Crosby's son was going to sing a number on the show. He had heard our records on the radio and asked his agent if maybe he could get the four preps to back him on the show. Well, of course, when we got word that we were going to appear, I didn't mention, and my early influences along with the Mills Brothers were Bing Crosby. I idolized Bing. And now I'm showing up at CBS Television City, by which I had driven many times as a teenager, and always wondered what went on at this Television City in this magical place called CBS. Suddenly I'm pulling up in the parking lot, walking to my dressing room, and about to join and rub shoulders with Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Louis Armstrong, Rosemary Clooney. And the thing we were most concerned about was that when we walked into the rehearsal for the first time and these major giant stars are there, how do we act? I mean, how are they going to treat us? Or, what do we do? Well, bless his heart. 11 o'clock came, which was our rehearsal time. We bounded up the stairs to the studio, pushed back, opened the big double doors and walked in. And there's Sinatra, and there's Louis Armstrong, and there's Bing Crosby. Bless his heart, Bing Crosby looked over and said, here come the harmonizers. Used to do it a little of that myself. Hey, fellas, come on in. Well, right away, we were peers. We were colleagues. The ice was broken, and we were off and running. I watched Sinatra that whole week rehearsing with the band, snapping his fingers, being groovy and ring-a-ding-ding, and Bing sitting over on the stool with a golf club in his hand, kind of tapping his tummy in rhythm and taking it easy. And I say in the book, Bing was kind of the old hound dog asleep on the porch with nothing to prove, and Frank was the little puppy running around the front yard trying to impress everybody. So it was a magical week, Harvey. It's something I will never forget. Poor Lindsey Crosby, Bing's son, was absolutely terrified. I think he would have rather had a root canal than sing on the show. But we backed him as well as we could and did a little dance step and so forth behind him to give it a little animation, and it came off passably well. But when the number finished, Lindsey left. The show wasn't even over yet, and he was gone. He just wanted to get out of there. And it was quite a week.
What an experience. You performed numerous times with George Burns and Carol Channing in Las Vegas, Lake Tahoe, and on tour. What was it like working with them?
Well, Carol Channing was absolutely enchanting. The first day I showed up for rehearsal, not having met her before, and looked across the room, and there she was, this luminous, glowing blonde presence. And she saw me and waved and came over to me all excited and stood about an inch from my nose. Hi, I'm Carol. How are you? I found out later she's very nearsighted, so she didn't see very well. So she wanted to see who she was speaking with. Well, I fell in love with her immediately. She was energetic. She just radiated energy and just the dearest person. And then George came over to welcome me, and he reached out and shook. It was at George's house, by the way, where we were auditioning. He came over and shook my hand and said, "Hi, kid, don't steal any ashtrays." So the ice was broken right away. I was on a level with George because he was joking with me. George became my godfather, my show business godfather. He would take me into his dressing room after the shows in Vegas and say, "You know that thing you do with the big guy where you just swoon and you fall back in a swoon? Wait one more beat before you fall. It'll be better." Well, I said to myself after I left his presence, we've been doing this number for a year at high school proms. We know it's funny. It's one beat and you fall, not two. To which our manager said, "You better count to two before you fall tomorrow night, because George will be in the wings watching and he'll be counting." I went out, and instead of the usual one and falling, which got a pretty good laugh, I waited one and got to two. I said, "Well, the moment's gone. We've lost it." I fell back. The crowd exploded in laughter. We couldn't even hear the band to finish the number. One little beat. And as I say in the book, so you see, boys and girls, there is such a thing as comic timing. Two beats, not one beat. That was just one of the many, many lessons he taught me. At one point, he said, "You really love it out there on stage, don't you?" I said, "Oh, God, I do love it." He said, "Okay, you know half of what it takes to have a happy life. You found out what you love to do. Now, the other half, get them to pay you for it." I mean, it was that kind of everyday folk wisdom that he imparted to me that I've never forgotten. I love that man dearly. He was, as I say, he became my God. Look at me. I'm choking up talking about it. He was a very special human being.
You really did have exposure to some of the greatest stars of all time. I mean, you shared the bill with Bob Hope at a show in Bloomington, Indiana. Did you get to chat with him at all?
Not really. No, he kind of hi fellas and walked past. No, but it was quite an experience watching him huddle before a show, as I'd known from the gossip in town. He always huddled with his writers just before a show, and they gave him pointers about what to say. So I was enthralled watching him and his brilliant comedy writers. Bob Hope said himself, "Without my writers, I'd be dead," he said. So it was quite an experience watching him warm up the act, if you will, and put in some highlights with his writers, then going on stage and killing the audience. Again, I'm 10 feet from a giant that I grew up idolizing, and how lucky can you get? It was quite an experience.
Oh my God, you had so many pinch me moments. You wrote in the book that the comic that you most enjoyed working with was Mort Sahl. Why?
Because it was a new kind of comedy. Although there was some say, let's say Will Rogers, who used to do political comedy and commentary, but it was pretty harmless, pretty benign. But Mort Sahl was a lot more pointed in his commentary on American politics, and that was a new thing for us. And he didn't come out in a tuxedo with a butterfly bow tie like the Vegas comics who would come out and assail you with loudmouth chatter about women drivers and mothers-in-law. No, he came out and talked about Nixon and about politics and about the American public's voting mentality and stuff. And I was just enthralled. He was not a warm, fuzzy kind of a guy, so we didn't hang around backstage and talk. I'd like to say we did because I would have loved to have a conversation with him. But just appearing with him, Harvey, at the Crescendo nightclub, which was 3 blocks from the front door of our parsonage when I was growing up. And when we opened there with him, I would literally drive by during the day to see our name up on the marquee 3 blocks from where I grew up. Mort Sahl was an extraordinary man.
Yeah, that's just another amazing moment that you could go full circle like that. Now, you and Robert Brunner wrote the renowned anthem, So Many Voices Sing America's Song, which became the official anthem of the bicentennial of the US Constitution. It was performed at 2 presidential inaugurations and at the dedication of Mount Rushmore, which you attended. Is that one of your proudest accomplishments?
Absolutely. And I think what resonated most for me, I don't know that I so far have paid proper tribute to my mom. When she found out I wanted to be a singer, she was a gospel radio singer herself and a choir director. She would sit for hours next to me. I would sit for hours next to her on the piano bench while we vocalized. So she was a wonderful support system and a tutor and a mentor for me. So there I was at Mount Rushmore many years after my mom had passed. And there's President Bush Sr. sitting about 5 seats away from me. And there's the United States Air Force Band and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing my song, So Many Voices Sing America's Song. And as the song got to its climax, Air Force One flew over at about 1,000 feet. And I had chills, and all I could think about was Mom. Hey, Mom, look what I did. Look where I am, thanks to you. So, yes, it resonated for me in so many ways, the satisfaction of seeing it happen, but more a tribute to my mom, who I think made it all possible and imbued in me the creativity to write something like that. So it was a very, very special moment for me.
You know, Bruce, you've given me goosebumps so many times during this interview. Are you beginning to see why I think that a Netflix miniseries is not out of the question?
From your mouth to God's ear, Harvey.
Now,
We'll see.
your hit song, More Money for You and Me, was dedicated to President Kennedy. Do you know if President Kennedy ever heard the song and what he thought of it?
We were told that he had at one point those two, hustling agents of ours called the White House when it hit, because as you know, in person, which is where we recorded that song for a live audience, we dedicated it to President Kennedy and the Peace Corps. So we became very much affiliated and allied with JFK in the eyes of the college crowds for which we performed. So our agent called the White House and asked one of Kennedy's aides, if the president by any chance was aware of the record. Now, maybe she was being diplomatic and making nice, but she said, yes, he did. He listened to it and he enjoyed it quite a bit. So the plans began to be made to get us to do a concert for Jack and Jackie at the White House. And unfortunately, we lost JFK before that ever came to pass. But even knowing that he might have sat and listened to our funny little number was quite a thrill in itself.
I want to take you back, Bruce, to the night of November 22nd, 1963. You had just learned that JFK had been assassinated, and you were booked to perform a concert that night at Iowa University. You wrote that you will never forget that concert. I know you ended the show with He's Gone Away. Tell me about that night.
Well, we were doing college concert tour in the Midwest at the time, and we were now scheduled. By the way, it was Ohio University, not Iowa. I wrote Iowa at one point in one of my drafts and realized it was wrong. But we were set to do a show that evening, and around 2 o'clock we were going to leave for sound check. It's about a 2-hour drive to the campus, and we were all gathering in the parking lot. And I happened to walk by our musical director's room. The door was open. And as I passed his room, I heard the television and Walter Cronkite's voice with those words none of us will ever forget. This word apparently official from Dallas, Texas. President Kennedy died. I fell to my knees. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And after a few moments, the whole band gathered in Marty Harris, our musical director's room, and we were just stunned and a total wreck. And Glenn said, well, I better leave and go to my room and call the dean at the college and tell him we'll do a makeup date when things settle down. We'll be happy to come back and do it. And he came back about 5 minutes later with a very stunned expression on his face and said, he's begged us, he's beseeched us to come ahead and do the show. He said the student body really would need this. It would be a balm to what we're all feeling at this point. Please, we're begging you, please come and do this show. Well, we were, as you can imagine, Harvey, total wrecks. I mean, so we did kind of an awkward group hug, and we all kind of shuffled to the parking lot and got in our van and drove off. And for the 2-hour drive to the university, we passed little towns with women sitting on bus benches. I remember 2 black women holding each other and sobbing as we drove past. I remember little kids with tears in their eyes, couldn't figure out why mommy was crying, leading them back home. We got there, and usually sound checks are, hey, move mic 1 over here. Can we give you a little more light on that? For some reason, this sound check, we were all subdued. Would you move the mic over here? We were all talking quietly. The dean came over and shook my hand, took my hand and 2 of his and said, thank you for being willing to do this. And the student, who was a student there at the time, and the first production he'd ever involved himself in, he was producing that concert. He would go on, as I think you probably know, to become world famous as a producer of the Emmys and the Grammys for 30 years, a man named Ken Ehrlich. But right now he was a nervous college student about to embark on his first production, and it was in jeopardy, and he was so grateful we were there. We had, on the way to the university in the van, we had gone through every single word, every gesture we did on stage. Is there anything that would be offensive or inappropriate for what's happened? And cut out some of the numbers, come out some of the wisecracks that weren't appropriate. And we had decided the last number would be He's Gone Away, which is a Civil War song about a soldier who has died, and the commanding officer is singing the song to his widow. He's gone away for to stay. Look at me. A little while. I always have trouble telling this. Well, we leaned in to sing that final song. And when we first came out on stage to start the show, a very muted response, but we did a little harmless comedy. I made a joke about how tall Eddie was and Glenn's blonde pompadour, all, inoffensive things. And by the time we got to the final number, there was a kind of emotional unity with that audience that I've never experienced before or since. We were all in the same emotional boat, if you will. Well, we started to think He's Gone Away. We wouldn't make eye contact with each other. I knew if I made eye contact with one of the other guys, the dam would break and I'd lose it. We got through the song. At the end, Marv went, He's gone away, with a light, fragile little note. And we came around him and surrounded him with that harmony that we'd sung together since high school. And we finished the song. And when we finished, there was not a sound, no applause. The crowd got up in a very muted, silent, kind of introspective way and shuffled out to a world far different than the one they had wakened to that morning. And it was a moment I will never forget, that emotional unity, that fact that, boy, am I a lucky guy. I'm a singer blessed with the ability to go up and give people some solace and some comfort. For the millionth time, I said, I am so glad to be a singer.
Wow, that story is really the exemplification of what it means when you say the show must go on. But I think that night, the four preps were healers. You know, you were consoling the audience, not just entertaining them. And I'm so glad you immortalized that evening in your book and now on our show. You've really had quite an amazing life, I gotta say. Now, you know, in 1964, when the Beatles became big stars, you released a song called Letter to the Beatles, which was climbing the charts, but Capitol Records pulled the song at the insistence of Beatles manager Brian Epstein. Did he say why he objected to the song?
Yes, he thought it put the Beatles in a very unfavorable mercenary light. And we hadn't had a hit for a year or two, and all the disc jockeys were saying, "Come on, guys, get back on track here." Well, as you know from listening, if you have, to our concert albums, we commented on every fad and trend, from granny dresses to cannabis to Mother Teresa to Fidel Castro to the Peace Corps. Anything that was popular and new, surfing songs, we had fun with. So when the Beatles came along, Glen Larson, my writing partner in the group, said, "Let's have some little fun with Beatlemania." So we wrote a song about a teenage girl who falls in love with Beatles when she hears their first record, writes them a heartfelt news fan letter saying, "I love you guys. I love you. I will love you forever." And they answer her back saying, "Thank you very much. Please send 25 cents for a fan club card." Well, Mr. Epstein evidently did not believe that that put them in a very favorable light, called the Capitol Tower from London. We're on tour in New Orleans, and I get a phone call from our producer. He said those dreaded words, "Are you sitting down?" Because the record in his first week had entered the charts at 55 in the top 100 with a bullet, which meant it was red hot. All the disc jockeys are saying, "Hey, the preps are back with tongue in cheek. Hooray." Brian Epstein. So now our producer calls us in New Orleans and said, "Brian Epstein called the tower yesterday, said, we, the royal we, if you will, we have heard the four preps new release. We are not amused." In 24 hours, Harvey, it was pulled from every record store in the country. Cease and desist orders were issued to every radio station not to play the song. And that was our last chart record. That plus the Motown sound that had just come along about the same time, we realized kind of wrote finite to what the preps were about. And we were all already embarked on other individual careers and felt safe and comfortable and saying, "Hey, it's been a great 13 years. Give ourselves each a hug and go on our separate ways." So the Beatles and Brian Epstein sort of wrote finite to our recording career, but it all worked out okay.
Well, how did it feel to be so betrayed by your own record company?
Well, you remember Idols, I mean, Idiots is in the is in the title of my book. I just felt, well, Capitol Tower, and I was still, even though we'd been around a few years by then, kind of naive, because I said, we've been with Capitol for 13 years. The Beatles are brand new. Capitol's going to take our side in this. Well, of course, not realizing, as I should have, that the Beatles were on the way up and the preps were on the way down. So they made the wise corporate decision, but it did hurt. It felt very hurtful, I must say, that they didn't try and ride it out and see if they could make it work. But so be it. That was what happened.
In 1977, Elvis Presley was about to record one of your songs entitled "What Would I Do Without My Music?" but he died before he was able to record it. That must have been heartbreaking.
Well, it was not because of my song, but because of what he represented. And I had been lucky enough to have a phone conversation with him some months earlier about the song. And he said, "I love it." He said, "I think it could be for me what My Way has become for Frank Sinatra. And I very much am looking forward to recording it with a black gospel choir." And being a preacher's kid, the minute he said that, I could hear exactly what the choir would sound like. And I knew, he had a great gospel feel anyhow for black gospel music. So I knew it would be a wonderful record. And he was about to record it in a couple of weeks, and then he passed. And I got a call from a mutual friend of ours who said Elvis is gone. And at the time was a television producer producing a show called Name That Tune. So I was in my office at the studio. I could hear the band downstairs rehearsing all this fine, upbeat, happy music. And I just hung up the phone hearing Elvis was gone. And it was quite a mixed emotion. It hit me hard. And sorry he didn't get to record it it's gone on so far to be recorded by 40 or 50 choral groups around the world because it is a lyric which expresses what music can do to restore our souls when things are getting rough and we're not on top of the world. Put the earphones on, listen to some good music, and let it restore your enthusiasm and your energy. So, of all the songs I've written, I guess it would be the one I'd most personally identify with because I know what music has meant in my life when rough times came along, and I hope it imparts that to people who hear it.
Yes, it's a beautiful song. You know, Bruce, looking back at your career, you've said that your formula for success can be reduced to 6 words: dream big, work hard, and get lucky. So my question is, what percentage of your success do you think was luck?
Well, if you having read the book, you know how many times that word lucky appears in page after page. I tell you, luck is a huge factor. I mean, let's start with lucky singing my first solo at 4 and realizing it was what I wanted to do. So number one, lucky at age 4, I knew what I wanted. At age 10, how lucky can you get when I'm aspiring with show business career? My family moves from Chicago, Illinois to West Hollywood, 2 blocks from the Sunset Strip and the Capitol Tower. How lucky can you get that a prominent personal manager heard our demo tape when we were trying to search for a contract and happened at the time to manage a group called Les Paul and Mary Ford. So he had it in at Capitol Records and took our little rather pathetic demo tape to Capitol, and they signed us. I mean, how lucky we were that I one day on the beach picked my ukulele up, having seen Catalina off in the distance, and wrote a song about it. So luck was a big factor. But also you got to have, as my dad used to say, stick-to-itiveness. You got to stick to it. You can't give up. You got to keep pushing and dreaming and hoping and working. And so I've maybe equal parts of luck and hard work, but luck certainly is a big factor.
Yeah, I think that destiny, luck, you know, and the public got so lucky because of your music, because of all the joy that you've brought us. It's just been an enormous honor meeting you, Bruce, having this chance to chat with you about your amazing life and career. I feel like this interview is kind of the proof that there needs to be a mini series about the 4 preps because you really take us through the history of modern pop music.
Thank you. Well, that's you and I keep our fingers crossed, Harvey. We'll see what happens. By the way, you've had an interesting career going from judgeship to doing what you do now. So I imagine luck plays some part in that as well.
Yeah, I think so for sure. I want to thank you for all the great music. Thank you for writing that wonderful book. And most of all, thank you for taking the time to appear on our show, Bruce.
I look forward to it, and it lived up to my expectations. I thank you, Harvey. Let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Our guest has been the founding member of America's first boy band, the 4 Preps. His book, entitled Icons, Idols, and Idiots of Hollywood, My Adventures in America's First Boy Band, is now available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to my producer, Steve Silver, my director of programming, Deborah Batsafin, my production assistant, Rosa Puzo, my PR directors, Eileen Shapiro and Jimmy Starr, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.